In 1929, World War I caused the economy to collapse and spread fascism. Everyone was desperate for a way out. Dr. Ritter and his wife, Dora, decided to leave Germany and move to the uninhabited island of Floriana in the Galapagos archipelago. Whenever a ship passed by, Ritter sent letters telling the world about his reclusive life. His goal was to write a new philosophy that would save humanity from itself. In 1932, inspired by Ritter's search, Margaret, her husband Heinz, and their son Harry sold everything and moved to Floriana. The family dragged half of their belongings up the hill until they found Ritter and Dora. Hess showed a newspaper explaining that all the letters had been published and that they had become famous in Germany. Ritter pointed out that he went there in search of solitude, but nevertheless agreed to show the place to Heinz. He showed his garden and explained that, as they were strict vegetarians, it was their main source of food. It took 12 months to clear the weeds. There was no swamps, no rivers, just 2 small springs that collected rain. Hein assured them they weren't there for fun. It turned out Harry had tuberculosis, but the family couldn't afford a sanatorium. Hein heard that Dora was about to be cured of sclerosis, but Ritter refused to say how, as that would be part of the manuscript. Meanwhile, Dora chatted with Margaret while caring for the animals, calling her a child bride because of the age difference with Heinz. Margaret revealed that Harry was not her son, as she was Heinz's second wife. Dora explained that most of the animals on the island could kill them, and that Ritter hated how much she cared for the donkey, as he considered loving animals a futile need for approval. Later, Ritter took the family to a cave where they could spend the night. The only source of water was a tiny trickle. When Dora returned home, she said she didn't like that family and reminded her husband that they went to the island in search of isolation, that he removed bugs from her skin while sharing his real plan. But he shouldn't have helped the family. He went to the island seeking isolation, and in guiding them, he ended up creating his own rivals for scarce resources. Over the next few days, the family worked hard under the scorching sun to start a new life. Hein was determined, but it was clear that Harry and Margaret were unhappy. At night, they could barely sleep because of the mosquitoes. They managed to dig a large hole and create a small pond by guiding the trickle of water. They even worked in the rain, but Harry's respiratory problems made it difficult. One night, Hein woke from a strange dream. Margaret took the opportunity to tell him she was pregnant. Hein was happy, but she didn't like the idea of raising a baby in that place. Suddenly, they heard a noise. Heinz ran Toto the other cave and discovered wild dogs eating the supplies. He quickly chased them away, but it was too late. Most of the supplies had been devoured. Margaret then went to the house of Ritter and asked if she could borrow Burrow the donkey, but Dora replied that he was busy. Margaret tried to make conversation, but the couple ignored her. When she left, Ritter and Dora were so pleased to hear that the family was suffering that they began making love to celebrate. As the family walked with their belongings, they heard a noise coming from the beach. He also heard and used his binoculars to see that a ship was approaching. On it, Baroness Eloise was preparing to disembark. She claimed to be the embodiment of perfection. Her lovers, Rudolph and Robert, carried her to the beach while her servant Manuel brought in her enormous, sophisticated wardrobe. She searched for an ideal spot and announced that she would build her own resort there. Afterward, she and her lovers ran to the sea to celebrate, while Manuel chased away the wild dogs. Moments later, Eloise and the men visited Ritter and Dora. They even brought a chair for her to sit on. Eloise expected Dora to kiss her hand, but Dora only shook it half-heartedly. He left the room without bothering to put on clothes. Eloise called him a tamer of nature and said he was famous in many countries, known as the future of civilization. Since she intended to camp on the island, Ritter pointed out the nearest water source. Soon after, Heinz and Margaret found Eloise and her lovers swimming that non-newly created lake. Rudolph becomes aggressive while Margaret explains that the lake is their drinking water. Then Eloise makes him back off and apologizes. She says she was desperate to get the salt out of her body. After Heinz kissing his hand, Eloise mentions that she's going to build a beach resort. She says she'll use the family lake until her men dig a well and delivers some letters before leaving. Some of them are for Ritter. Heinz then takes them to him. Ritter is irritated that the envelopes are open and says that Eloise could have delivered them herself. She didn't do it to make it look like Hines was the one who opened them, which Ritter interprets it as a declaration of war. Then Hines goes to Eloise, who now keeps a wild dog as security. He asks why she tried to turn him against her. Ritter, and she responds that Ritter started it all by sending her to his lake to cause conflict. Ritter's mistake was pointing out the other family's lake. He could have shown her the second water source, but he chose to create a direct conflict over resources on purpose. Sash shows a report about his resort, which will be exclusive to millionaires. A few days later, Eloise stops by his house Ritter and taunts him, calling him Dr. Pig. He gets angry, demands that she repeat it to his face, and she repeats it several times. Meanwhile, Hines finds a cow and chases it until they reach the caves. With Margaret's help, they lock the cow away and celebrate finally having milk. In spring, Hines' house is already half built, and Margaret manages to harvest her first real vegetable. Eloise appears with her men and announces that she will camp with them until the resort is ready. Margaret says she is pregnant and that the baby needs peace, but Eloise asserts that babies also need community and promises to be hospitable. They should have set boundaries from the start, as it was clear she wouldn't respect their peace. That night, Eloise parties with her men in the tent, irritating the family with the noise. One morning, Ritter discovers that a pig has eaten all his vegetables. Later, while taking a bath, he hears a gunshot. He discovers that Hines now has a rifle and is hunting. Eventually, Ritter decides to visit the family and is disappointed to see that they are doing very well. The house is ready and the vegetables are growing vigorously. He offers chickens in exchange for the cow's head, and Hines accepts. Margaret asks if Ritter would help when the baby was born, but he bursts into a philosophical speech and says none of this will end well. That night, Ritter cooks the cow's head. Dora reminds him that they are vegetarians and could live off the fruit from the trees until the garden grows back. They argue and trade accusations about who is putting in the least effort. Meanwhile, Rudolph continues digging holes around the island, trying to find drinking water without success. When he returns to camp, he has to listen to Eloise with Robert, which also upsets the family. Eloise asks for food, and Rudolph informs her that the supplies are gone. She panics because she only eats things brought from home. They argue, and she blames him for not planning properly. Eloise runs away, crying into the forest, and is eventually found by Harry. She talks about believing in herself and convinces him to run with her. Harry is excited, as his bad breath never allowed it. After the run, she gets him to talk and discovers that the family still has canned goods. Sometime later, Margaret is alone in the house and begins experiencing contractions. At the same time, Robert and Manuel break into the cave to steal supplies. Margaret goes out to call for help, and the two continue stealing. The pain increases, and she runs back, forcing them to hide. She spreads out sheets, prepares for the birth, and notices blood on her underwear. A noise outside distracts her, and she goes out again to look for her husband, which allows the men to escape. Upon smelling the blood, wild dogs surround Margaret, and she has to fend them off with a broom. In the tent, Eloise complains that the stolen supplies are insufficient. Manuel tells her about Margaret's situation and wants to help. Even Rudolph agrees, but Eloise stops everyone from leaving, saying they are only there to serve her. Then Margaret's water breaks, and she begins screaming in pain as she gives birth. She holds the baby close to her body because the dogs try to attack it. Just then, Harry and Hines return and scare the animals away with gunfire. Margaret thinks the baby is dead. However, Hines gently beats the baby until it cries. Margaret is still weak and faints. Heine runs to Ritter to ask for help. He doesn't want to go, but Dora forces him. After a quick assessment, he realizes that the placenta is stuck in the uterus. He removes it using hot water and a spoon. The process is painful, but it saves Margaret's life. Manuel peeks through the window and brings the news to Eloise, who asks why he didn't stop the doctor from helping. Offended, Manuel says he came as a builder, not to attack people, and calls her evil. The family continues to live in harmony, and the fresh air helps Harry's health. One afternoon, Eloise brings a can of food as a gift for the baby and apologizes for Manuel, saying he was a thief and that she sent him back to the boat. She lifts the baby into the air and invites the family to lunch. Later, when Margaret asks Hein, he refuses to go, disbelieving the story about Manuel, knowing that Eloise is behind the robbery. Margaret convinces him, saying that refusing might anger her and that she seems dangerous. After everything she's done, they should have broken off relations completely instead of accepting an invitation that was clearly a social trap. During lunch, Eloise sings and dances for everyone, but only Harry enjoys it. Ritter puts his false teeth to eat, and everyone discovers that he removed his real teeth when he arrived on the island to avoid infections. While Highness complains that all the dishes have been stolen, Eloise notices that Dora won't stop looking at the baby and tries to talk about the birth, but the guests quickly change the subject. Eloise continues to make passive-aggressive comments, making everyone uncomfortable. For a while, no one responds, until Ritter explodes and reveals that Dora cannot have children. Feeling exposed, she tries to leave, but the guard dog stops her. Eloise calls the dog back, and when Dora leaves, Ritter begins yelling that he wants Eloise off the island and threatens to expel her himself. Suddenly, Eloise pulls out a gun and shows papers from the governor of the Galapagos, saying the island belongs to her, leaving her with no way to confront her. Everyone leaves. When the family arrives home, they find Ritter waiting. He offers food in exchange for a rifle. Ritter leaves after the exchange and asks Margaret about some things Eloise said. Margaret eventually confesses that she only married him because he proposed and she wanted to escape her horrible home. That night, Ritter shoots the pig that keeps destroying his vegetable garden. In the summer, a drought hits the island and the family's lake dries up. Ritter makes great strides in his writing, but eventually hits a creative block. One afternoon, Rudolph begs his family for food, saying he hasn't eaten in days. They agree to feed him, and in return, he reveals a secret. Eloise stole everything from the films: the accent, the mannerisms, the stories, and even the title of Baroness. Her parents kicked her out because all she knew was shopping. So she traveled around Europe for a while, running out of money in Paris, where she had to work as a cheap feather dancer. When he enters the tent, he finds Eloise panicking because she's out of cigarettes. She smells food in his mouth and yells at him for befriending the enemy. Rudolph insults her and slaps her. He retaliates. Furious, Robert pushes Rudolph to the ground and beats him. Sometime later, a yacht arrives on the island. Alan, a friend of Ritter, brings some supplies. Since Alan is an explorer and film director in Hollywood, he has his own crew and camera. When Eloise meets him, she thinks she's found a solution to her problems. That night, Alan organizes a fancy dinner for everyone. A band plays beautiful music and Margaret cries. Then, Eloise wets her eyes to imitate her. Suddenly, a volcano erupts on another island, and everyone admires the view. Ritter realizes that Eloise is trying to win over Alan and fears she will ruin him. So he rushes to steal food from her supplies. Dora tries to stop him, reminding him of the philosophies he taught that he follows, but he ignores her. In private, Eloise tries to kiss Alan, who rejects her. Then she feigns chest pain to get Alan to place his hand over her heart. She says there's only one cure for loneliness and tries to use his hand to satisfy herself. However, Alan starts laughing and says he realized she's not really rich before leaving. Rudolph then asks if Eloise asked Alan to take him away as promised, but Eloise claims Alan will invest in her resort. Then she realizes her boxes are empty. In the morning, she watches Alan depart on his ship and loses all hope. Moments later, Ritter discovers that all his supplies have been stolen. He visits the family and urges them to choose sides. Ritter and Hines draw their guns and threaten Eloise to try to recover the stolen goods. Robert, in turn, also pulls a gun. Margaret and Harry rush into the middle of the melee to avoid a bloodbath. Furious, Ritter returns home and shoots his typewriter, leaving Dora disappointed. He announces he's going hunting and takes the last of his supplies for the trip, leaving only rotten food for the chickens. Meanwhile, Rudolph is having dinner with his family. Eloise appears looking for him, and Margaret asks him to ignore her, but Rudolph agrees to talk. She surprises him by offering him food and clothes, telling him he can leave if he wants. He kisses her and asks if there's anything he can do before he leaves. Suddenly, the family hears a noise and thinks the pig is eating their plants that Heinz he runs out and shoots. But when he lights up the place, he realizes he has killed Dora's donkey. Rudolph watches everything hidden. In the morning, Dora finds her chicken sick and her donkey missing. She goes to the family, and they tell her someone killed the animal, but don't go into details. Dora breaks down in grief, and Heinz helps her get back. In private, Heinz LLS Ritter the truth, and while they argue, see Robert hiding in the woods. The spy escapes, and the men conclude they must act. Robert, who only heard the argument, tells Eloise that her plan worked. In the forest, Ritter and Heinz encounter Rudolph, who repeats that he was forced to obey because she promised to send him home. Upon returning, Heinz he asks Margaret and Harry to go to the valley to get grass to reinforce the roof. Then the men grab their weapons and set out to confront Eloise again. Robert charges at them and, being younger, easily overpowers Heinz and Ritter. Rudolph stabs Robert's hand, which knocks him down, and tries to fight back to Heinz. He pulls him away and, after an intense struggle, stabs him several times until he's killed. Eloise appears and embraces Heinz, saying she's always been Robert's victim. Since no one believes her, she offers to share ownership of the island. But Ritter silences her with a shot to the head. Margaret hears the shot in the distance and becomes suspicious. The bodies are then thrown into the sea, and the men agree not to tell their wives the truth. It was an extreme decision. They could have tried to expel her or isolate her, but they chose murder as their final solution. That night, it finally rains, and Margaret comforts Hein as he wallows in guilt. The next morning, Rudolph pretends to have found a letter from Eloise saying that she and Robert have left the island. Dora is suspicious, as Eloise left behind many belongings. Ritter buys several of Rudolph's belongings, so he will have money when the next ship arrives, revealing that he has written to the governor and that they will soon receive a visit. Margaret confronts Heinz and says that Ritter may frame him for the murder. She suggests they need a plan. When Ritter arrives home, Dora announces that she is going to leave him because he ruined their cause. Ritter freaks out and uses pliers to forcefully pull out a rotten tooth. Afterwards, Dora goes for a walk in the forest and meets Margaret, who reveals that Ritter killed Eloise. She tries to warn her that Ritter is dangerous, but Dora doesn't believe her. Before leaving, Margaret gives Dora some healthy chickens, warning her not to cook the sick ones, as the contaminated meat could infect others as well. Meanwhile, a ship passes near the island. Rudolph jumps into the water and offers all his money to the captain until he throws him a lifebuoy. When Dora returns home, she discovers that Ritter has started writing again. To celebrate, she cooks the sick chickens and serves them to Ritter, without eating, along with the excuse that his mouth still hurts. Hours later, Ritter feels terrible pain and Dora calls her family for help. There is nothing Abe done, and it seems that Dora just wanted witnesses. With her last strength, Ritter cursed Dora before he died. In the fall, the governor arrives with some soldiers. Eloise's murder is in the newspapers, and Ritter's last letter said Heinz was the culprit. Dora confirms the story. However, when the governor tells Margaret, she claims that Ritter was also murdered. She explains that the poisoning came from his sick chickens and that she had given Dora healthy chickens the day before, proving Dora made a conscious choice. The governor eventually arrests Dora. Before leaving, he asks if the family wants to go along, but Margaret assures him they're happy to be alone. Margaret's final move was perfect, using Dora's own logic against her, proving the poisoning was intentional and turning the tables at the last minute. Based on a true story, the bodies of Eloise and Robert were never found. Dora published a book about the events on the island before dying in 1943 from sclerosis. Margaret released her own book contradicting everything Dora said. Rudolph never reached the mainland because the boat ran out of fuel and was lost. His body and that of the captain were later found. Margaret lived on the island until her death in 2000, at the age of 96. Her descendants still live there and run a small tourist inn. And so, we end Eden, a 2024 drama film. If you enjoyed it, leave a like and consider subscribing so you don't miss future videos.